Here is everything nobody actually knows about the death of Nolan Wells. Nobody knows the cause of death. Nobody knows the manner of death. Nobody knows what happened in the gap between the last time anyone can prove they saw him alive and the boats leaving Horn Island. And nobody, not one single person who has published a transcript of it, knows what is being said in the background of the recording this entire case now revolves around. Here is what you are going to know by the end of this video. You are not going to find out who is responsible for Nolan Wells' death. Nobody can tell you that yet, and anyone who says otherwise is selling you something. What you're going to be able to do is work out for yourself why that recording cannot mean what people are saying it means, from the audio, without taking anyone's word for it, including mine. Because there is a specific thing your brain does when it is handed bad audio and told what to listen for. It is documented, it is decades old, and it has already decided this case for several million people who don't know it happened to them. Once you can see it, you can't unsee it, not here. Not anywhere. Here's the shape of it. On the 4th of July, somebody called a towing company from a boat off the Mississippi coast. Broken pump taking on water, routine. 3 weeks later, that same recording, same file, nothing added to it, was being read as a confession. Start with what nobody disputes. On July 4, 2026, 18-year-old Nolan Wells traveled by boat to Horn Island, a barrier island roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. It's uninhabited. No shelter, no facilities, no cell service to speak of. On a holiday weekend, it fills with boats and it empties again by dark. Wells was a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. He went out with a group of friends from high school. The group came back, he did not. His body was found 2 days later, on July 6th, in the water off the northwest tip of the island by a National Park Service agent. Somewhere inside that gap, between the last time anyone can corroborate seeing him alive and the boats leaving, is the question the entire country has been arguing about for a month. And inside that same window, one artifact exists with a timestamp on it, a phone call. It was not a 911 call. It was a call to Sea Tow, a private membership-based marine towing service, the roadside assistance of the water. Somebody aboard one of the boats tells the dispatcher their bilge pump has stopped working, that they're taking on water, that there are roughly 7 people on board, and asks them to come. A bilge pump is the small electric pump that clears water out of the bottom of a hull. When it fails on a boat that's shipping water, you have a problem with a clock attached to it. The call is short, it's loud, and there are other people talking in the background the whole way through. Later in the same exchange, the dispatcher is told the situation has been resolved and that no help is needed after all. That recording was released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources and distributed to news outlets. Which means it entered public circulation not as evidence but as a media file. Remember that, it matters later. Here is the thing about the original, it is bad audio. Phone line bandwidth, wind, an engine, a boat in distress, and several people talking over each other away from the microphone. In the background there is chatter that is genuinely, physically unintelligible. Unintelligible audio is not empty. It's the most dangerous kind of evidence there is because it will hold whatever shape you press into it. In late July, an entertainment news outlet published what it described as an enhanced version of that call, and reported that phrases could now be made out in the background that hadn't been audible before. Within days, other enhancements were circulating. Independent audio engineers pulled the file, ran their own processing, published their own versions, and critically published transcripts of what they believed the background voices were saying. Those transcripts went everywhere. They were quoted on cable news. They were treated in a matter of hours as though a hidden layer of the case had been unlocked. So let's be precise about what audio enhancement actually does. Because most people have absorbed the version of it they saw in a police procedural, where a technician types a command and a blurred voice resolves into a clean sentence. That is not what happens. Enhancement is subtractive and interpretive. The main tools are equalization, boosting some frequency bands and cutting others, noise reduction, channel isolation, and gain, which is simply making something louder. Every one of those operations works on information that is already in the file. None of them can add information that was never captured. If a word was never encoded in the recording, no amount of processing will produce it. What processing can do is change which parts of the existing signal your ear latches onto. Cut the low end and the sibilance jumps forward. Boost a mid-range band and mouth sounds become consonants. Compress the dynamics and background noise rises to the same apparent level as speech. The result is a file that sounds clearer. Clearer is not the same as more accurate. You have not recovered the original signal. You have produced a new, altered signal that your brain finds easier to assign meaning to, whether or not that meaning was ever there. And there's a pattern in which words tend to emerge from noise once you know to look for it. They are almost always short, one or two syllables. Heavy on plosives and fricatives, the hard consonant sounds, the P's and T's and K's and S's. That isn't a coincidence, and it isn't evidence of speech either. Those are the sounds that a boat engine, wind across a microphone, a hand knocking a phone, and clipped digital compression all naturally produce. Noise generates consonant-shaped artifacts constantly. What it can't generate is a full sentence with grammar in it, so your brain supplies the grammar and hangs it on the artifacts. The phrases people report hearing in degraded recordings are, with striking consistency, short, blunt, emotionally loaded fragments, which is exactly what you'd expect from noise plus expectation. It's also exactly what you'd expect from a real hidden conversation. The two cases are indistinguishable from the outside, and that ambiguity is the entire problem. This is why two competent engineers, both acting in complete good faith, can process the same source file and arrive at two different transcripts. Neither of them is lying. They have made different subtractive choices and their ears have completed different patterns. This is the thing I promised you at the start, here it is. There's a second problem and it's larger than the first because it doesn't live in the audio at all, it lives in you. Human hearing is not a recording device, it's a prediction engine. Your auditory system takes a degraded, incomplete signal and fills in the gaps using expectation, context, grammar, and above all, what you have been primed to expect. Most of the time, this is a gift. It's how you follow a conversation in a crowded bar. Applied to forensic audio, it's a catastrophe. You have already experienced this. Anyone who has watched a video with subtitles over noisy audio has had the sensation of suddenly, clearly hearing a line, and then finding it ambiguous the moment the subtitles are gone. That's not the audio changing, that's priming. The same effect drove one of the strangest trials of the 20th century, when a court was asked to consider whether hidden phrases were embedded backwards in heavy metal records. Once listeners were told what to listen for, they heard it consistently and sincerely. When they weren't told, they heard noise. And here's the part that makes it so hard to defend against. A primed hearing feels identical to a real one. There is no internal warning light. You do not experience it as an interpretation. You experience it as hearing a word with total confidence. Which means that the confidence of the person telling you what's on the tape carries no information about whether it's on the tape. This is precisely why forensic audio examination has protocols and why those protocols look tedious from the outside. You work from the original file, not a copy. You document the chain of custody. You do the analysis before you write the transcript, not after. Where possible, the analyst is not told in advance what they're expected to find. And when phrases are genuinely disputed, the responsible finding is not a competing transcript, it's the word unintelligible. In this case, the transcripts came first, they came from copies, and they came to an audience that had already been told what the phrases meant. Robert Fried, a digital forensics examiner, compared the widely circulated enhanced version against the file the state had released. He reported that he could not corroborate the phrases that had been claimed. He also flagged something structural. The enhanced version ran roughly 20 seconds longer than the original and carried a different digital fingerprint. That difference doesn't prove anyone acted dishonestly. Re-encoding a file, importing it into editing software, looping a section, exporting it again, all of that can change a file's length and its hash. That's the point. Once a recording has been through that process, the thing being analyzed is no longer the thing that was recorded. And there's a step further back that most of the coverage skipped entirely. The file the state released was itself redacted. Account numbers and phone numbers were removed before publication. So the public version was never the original recording, it was already a processed derivative, with material stripped out and metadata altered. Follow the chain all the way through. There is an original recording held by a private towing company and by investigators. From that, a redacted version was produced for public release. That redacted version was distributed to news outlets and published online. It was then downloaded from a video platform. It was imported into music production software. Sections were isolated, looped, boosted, and exported, and from that final file a transcript was written. The argument that consumed a month of national coverage began at Generation 4. The engineer behind the most widely shared version has publicly stood behind her work, and has said that investigators never contacted her to review her analysis. Both things can be true and neither resolves anything. She may well be a careful practitioner, careful practitioners still cannot authenticate a chain they were never given access to. Nobody who has published a transcript of this recording has had the original file. That is not a slight, it's a description of the situation. While all of that played out, the evidence that can actually answer questions has been sitting where nobody can read it. The state autopsy was completed at the end of July. It has not been released. Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath has said the report will be withheld until a grand jury reviews it, and has pointed out that in that county, every death except natural causes and non-criminal traffic deaths goes before a grand jury as standard practice. The family commissioned an independent autopsy. The forensic pathologist who performed it, Dr. Roger Mitchell, listed both cause and manner of death as undetermined pending further investigation. He explained that advanced decomposition and the fact that a full autopsy had already been conducted, with major organs and portions of the neck removed, significantly limited what a second examination could establish. Separately, an analytical review of photographs, video, GPS data and witness accounts concluded that a material gap remains in the corroborated timeline between the last independently verified sighting of Wells and the departure of the boat that brought him to the island. That review explicitly reached no conclusion about whether a crime occurred. Sheriff John Ledbetter has said investigators have interviewed roughly 60 witnesses, that the FBI is assisting with digital evidence, and that his department will not work to a deadline set by public pressure. And in the vacuum, this is what filled in. The reward for information reached $225,000, funded in large part by public figures with no direct connection to the case, and in one instance, by the father of one of the young men who was on the island. 3 separate people, none of whom appear to know Wells, his family, or anyone on those boats, have been federally charged over threats to witnesses to a judge, and bomb threats phoned into county offices. An attorney representing one family has said they are preparing defamation actions, has retained a private investigation firm to identify people targeting his clients, and has served a cease and desist on at least one online creator. State officials have had to publicly warn that fabricated documents relating to the case are circulating online, forged paperwork, presented as leaked official records, passed around by people who believed they were helping. Families on every side of this have received death threats. That includes Nolan Wells' own parents. The family's legal team, led by civil rights attorney Ben Crump, has retained its own audio experts to review the distress call, subpoenaed social media records, and pushed for a joint inspection of phones connected to the case. That is the correct instinct, and it's worth naming why. They are trying to move the recording out of the comment section and into a laboratory, where a chain of custody exists and where the finding can be unintelligible if that's what the evidence supports. There are 2 questions in this case, and they keep getting collapsed into one. The first is whether Nolan Wells' family has been given a full and honest account of how their son died. That question is legitimate. It is unanswered. An 18-year-old went to an island with friends, and the people who went with him came home, and he didn't, and the timeline still has a hole in it. Wanting to know what happened in that hole is not a conspiracy theory. It's the minimum thing a family is owed. The second question is whether a 4th-generation copy of a boat towing call can answer the first one. It can't. And treating it as though it hasn't brought anyone closer to the truth, it has produced federal threat charges, defamation letters, and a month of people being certain about a sentence nobody can prove was ever spoken. A grand jury will see the sealed report. The public has seen a processed copy of a phone call about a broken pump. Those are not the same thing, and the gap between them is where this entire month has been spent. As of this recording, in August of 2026, no cause of death has been released, no manner of death has been determined, no charges have been filed. The investigation is open. One question, and I'm genuinely interested in the answer. If the original, unredacted recording were released tomorrow, straight from the source, chain of custody intact, do you think it would change a single mind at this point? Or has the case already moved somewhere that evidence can't reach it? Tell me below.